hold on. Let's get those numbers. Seema Modi has them. NVIDIA. Seema, what does it look like?
John, second quarter earnings are in for NVIDIA. 68 cents adjusted versus the estimate of 64 cents. So a beat on its bottom line. Revenue at $30.04 billion, also higher than Wall Street consensus of $28.7 billion. We have comments here from CEO Jensen Huang in the press release. Hopper demand remains strong and the anticipation for Blackwell is incredible. He says NVIDIA achieved record revenues as global data centers are in full throttle to modernize the entire computing stack. He goes on to say that Blackwell samples are shipping to our partners and customers. Spectrum X, Ethernet for AI, and NVIDIA AI enterprise software are two new product categories achieving significant scale. Another data point here, NVIDIA announcing a $50 billion repurchase of shares. We are watching the stock here move fractionally higher in overtime. John, we'll get you the guidance in just a second.
All right, we'll await that guide. It looks like it's a little bit above expectations. Nicole, what do you do with it here if you feel like you missed the big move?
The earnings beats are narrowing. I think that's exactly what I was watching over your shoulder as the market was trying to digest in the moment. When the earnings beats are narrowing, the street is less impressed on where we're headed next. And so I think until there's more clarity around movement outside of the hyperscalers, obviously adoption from finance, from healthcare, from the consumers, like we started to hear from Walmart. That's the next leg. And so I think the more we learn about Blackwell, what the stack's going to do, the demand for the stack, and these higher, even higher margin products, right? This next gen, next wave, that's what moves us higher. And so I wouldn't say this isn't an entry point because we believe that we are long NVIDIA for 18 plus months here.
Along those lines, Paul, the fact that you had revenue up 152% year over year, but perhaps more significantly, revenue up 122% year over year, which represents another quarter of more than doubling. I mean, it tripled in the last quarter. So it does represent a deceleration in that rate of growth. And I wonder how much that is factoring into the stock as you see these rapid moves on your screen right now, but we're currently down 4%.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, we talked about, earlier before it released, they were going to have to exceed 30 billion just to, keep the market somewhat level here. But to your point, they've been increasing revenues so high. Revenues have more than quadrupled over the last 3 years. That's not going to happen again over the next 3 years. You'd have to have revenues of over 500 billion a year in order to keep that pace going. So the pace is going to slow. And so we always hear about, it's trading at a cheaper valuation now than it was a year ago. But the growth was so much stronger over the last year. That pace of growth is going to slow. I'm not saying that NVIDIA is a stock that you don't want to own, but you have to reset your expectations here. What we've seen in the growth is going to slow down going forward. And, I think there's other places where investors can look in the market outside of just these Mag 7 type stocks. And you want to look for a broadening of the rally to areas that, we're not talking about every day, that 75 analysts aren't covering, and that the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and CNBC aren't reporting stories about newly minted millionaires because of NVIDIA stock. There's going to be a new crop of stocks going forward, and that's where you want to look at as an investor.
Well, yeah, it's certainly something we've been looking at here at Overtime specifically. I want to get back to Seema Modi. She's got more details from this NVIDIA report. Seema.
Q3 revenue guidance, Morgan, is being looked at here at $32.5 billion. That is higher than Wall Street estimate of $31.7 billion. And if we were just to break out the data center revenue for the quarter, $26.3 billion, that is above the street expectation of $25.2. But as we know, the bar was high going into this report, the emphasis being on the size of the beat and the raise. The conference call does begin at 5 p.m. Eastern. I would also just point again to that $50 billion buyback. Shares are down 5% in overtime. John and Morgan.
All right, Seema, thanks. Pat Moorhead, stock's now down 5%. It was down as much as 8 or 9. Of course, the story changes rapidly, and you can't count on anything directionally, certainly before the earnings call. Blackwell mentioned a couple times here in the release, but nothing necessarily about volume delivery, right?
That's exactly right. And, data center is up 154%, but it's just not good enough. Investors could be reacting to what came out in the CFO note, which talked about Blackwell having a mask set change. I'm reading this right now, and they expect to begin shipping in the fourth quarter and continue into fiscal.
What's a mask set change?
Yeah, a mask set is essentially a metal change that goes in. You have to actually change the design and go into the foundry to increase yield. And anytime yield is discussed, John, it sets off panic. And that's exactly what I'm reading here. Even if it's, I think on the call they have to talk about what kind of a shift could this mean. It'd be great for them to say, no change. All of our customers are gonna fill this in, but yeah, they are talking about an issue with Blackwell that was rumored.
Okay, all the more reason to tune into the call here as we count down to that in a little over 30 minutes. Mike Santoli, I want to get your thoughts on what we're seeing as we do see these rapid ticks on the screen here in overtime in the stock. We had a guest on the show yesterday and he said, looking at the options action, what was priced in was a 9 to 10% move in either direction for NVIDIA.
Yeah, all day today, about 11% move was priced in based on how the at-the-money options were trading. That doesn't necessarily mean it's perfectly predictive, but it shows you what people were willing to bet on. And the results, as everybody's been saying, this sort of deceleration, certainly still amazing growth, but relative to expectations, just not really vaulting them by as much of a margin. The smallest earnings beat in any quarter in the last year and a half for NVIDIA up till now was like 9%. This beat by less than 5% on adjusted EPS. So still good. The revenue guide, $800 million higher than the street was at for the coming quarter. All of that's in the positive direction, but the market kind of got there, and I think it's almost going to be somewhat comforting or maybe soothing to investors not to have to feel like you're chasing this incredibly fast-moving story. This company added $100 billion in annual revenue like over the course of 2 years. It added like a target over 2 years. It was impossible to keep up with that pace. So we'll see where it settles out, from here. It's not a crazy valuation, but it's one that's ramped so fast. $50 billion buyback is nice. Guess what? The stock traded literally $50 billion worth of stock today alone. So it's not exactly something that's going to soak up a ton of supply.
To that point, there is a lot of money in NVIDIA stock moving in overtime right now. This is a $3 trillion market cap stock. It was down 8-9% at one point, higher, lower. Now it's down about 3% in overtime, but the call still to come. Thank you, Paul Hickey, Nicole Webb, Patrick Moorhead, and of course our Mike Santoli, who we might see later. We often see him later. All right, we got much more reaction to NVIDIA and the rest of today's earnings on the way. Up next, analyst Angelo Zeno is going to give us his first take on NVIDIA's results and what he wants to hear from management on the call at the top of the hour. Shares of NVIDIA, meanwhile, still lower by about 4.5% after the company reported a beat on the top and bottom lines, announced a $50 billion buyback. For more, let's bring in CFRA's senior equity analyst, Angelo Zeno. He's got a buy rating, $139 price target on the stock. Angelo, it looks like there is indeed some adjustment that NVIDIA is doing in the production process for the Blackwell platform. How much more do we need to know about that?
Well, I think we kind of want to know, a little bit more in terms of kind of, what the ramp is going to look like in terms of Blackwell here over the next couple of quarters. Clearly it's been delayed here. I think really what investors want to know, and when you kind of look at the numbers here, right? I mean, you look at the actual July quarter numbers, they were pretty good, beat the data center number by a little bit north of $1 billion or so, grew 15% sequentially. When you kind of look at the guide here for the October quarter, it implies a sequential increase of less than 10%. It's kind of the lowest sequential increase we've seen since essentially kind of the Microsoft OpenAI announcement of 10 billion plus back in early 2023. So, obviously the beat and raises are going to be more difficult to come by. Partly, we think, at least going into the October quarter, is this delayed Blackwell ramp. I do think you've got the potential now to potentially see a reacceleration once that Blackwell ramp actually takes place here, but we kind of need to know a little bit more details in kind of what the trajectory of that looks like here.
But Angelo, is this kind of like NVIDIA is the U.S. women's team in the 4x400 relay? They were so far ahead that if they run one leg a little slower than they could, does it really affect the medal?
I mean, listen, I really don't think it does, right? So, at the end of the day, I guess you can make that comparison. I think NVIDIA right now is perfectly okay with where they sit here. The numbers in our view, again, were pretty good. The guidance, I think, was okay as well. I think if you're an investor right now, you kind of have to look ahead into calendar 2025. Blackwell will launch. It will ramp. We think it's going to be an enormous cycle because of the fact that it is going to be more of this platform-based ramp. So if you are selling your shares here after hours, we would be careful for that, because this is going to be a free cash flow monster. Even if the year-over-year growth rates are clearly going to decelerate, that is, pretty much well reflected in the valuations here, we think.
And along those lines, I mean, we've seen more than 33 million shares change hands just here in overtime since this report was released. I want to dig a little deeper into this, because they also said in the release that Hopper demand remains strong. So it raises the question for me, how many folks are going to continue to focus on Hopper even if you have a delay in Blackwell, or is that going to be deferred spending? Like, how to think about that mix?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we'll get a little bit more detail here on the call as well. But the H200 just recently ramped. It's not like it's been out for over a year or so. It just kind of ramped here over the last couple of months. So we're still early in kind of the H200 ramp, and we do think there is significant demand. We do think kind of demand continues to outstrip supply. And you've kind of alluded, or you've kind of heard a number of these hyperscale providers here over the last couple of months kind of allude to the fact that they're going to remain aggressive buyers here. So as far as the H100, H200 is concerned here, at least over the next couple of months, we do think kind of these cloud companies are essentially going to kind of invest aggressively on kind of these Hopper GPUs, because essentially that's the only thing out in the market right now until Blackwell ramps.
Okay. Angelo Zeno, thanks for joining us with a buy rating.
Okay, let's talk about NVIDIA's earnings today. So NVIDIA reported revenue of $30 billion and non-GAAP EPS of 68 cents. So they beat expectations on both revenue and EPS. As for guidance, NVIDIA raised their outlook for next quarter's revenue to $32.5 billion, which is also higher than consensus estimates of roughly $31.77 billion. As I've mentioned in recent videos on this channel, I thought NVIDIA needed to raise revenue guidance for next quarter by $2 billion or more above consensus estimates in order to satisfy market participants in the short term, and unfortunately we did not get that today. NVIDIA did raise guidance for next quarter, and they did raise guidance higher than consensus estimates, but this is after multiple quarters of raising guidance billions of dollars higher than consensus estimates. The same did not happen today, and so this is in the short term being perceived as somewhat of a disappointment, even though next quarter's guidance was technically a beat of consensus estimates. Additionally, NVIDIA's gross margin this quarter was 75.1%, which is down 3.3 points sequentially from last quarter. As for Blackwell, NVIDIA CFO said that samples are shipping to customers now, and Blackwell's production ramp is scheduled to begin in the fourth quarter and continue into fiscal 2026. CFO Colette Kress also said that NVIDIA executed a change to the Blackwell GPU mask to improve production yield, and CEO Jensen Huang later said that the change to the mask is complete and Blackwell is expected to ship in Q4. Jensen reiterated that demand for Hopper is strong and demand for Blackwell is incredible. And on top of all of that, NVIDIA authorized a $50 billion share repurchase while leaving the cash dividend unchanged. So overall, I would say that NVIDIA reported a great quarter. That being said, many market participants perceive this report as an indication that the rate of growth is slowing. And I'll be honest, that is concerning. Don't get me wrong, NVIDIA reported a great quarter and the company is still solid. I still expect NVIDIA to have solid growth over the next year. I just think that the market may now gradually start to view NVIDIA stock more like a typical mega cap tech stock with more predictable earnings growth. And therefore, we may not see the rapid growth and subsequent hype that we've seen thus far in NVIDIA stock. The company is still growing. In the short term, though, the hype may decline, and that is concerning in the short term because that introduces the potential for some form of multiple contraction. I'm not saying that the stock crashes, but I am saying that expectations for bombastic earnings growth is decreasing, and therefore a tighter multiple may be gradually applied to NVIDIA stock. Most of the Mag 7 stocks trade at about 20 or 30 something times current earnings. And at the time I'm making this video, NVIDIA is now trading in after hours somewhere around 55 times current earnings. So while that is not insanely high, it is higher than many of the other Mag 7 stocks that trade around 20 or 30 something times their current earnings. So I'm not saying that NVIDIA is going to crash, and I'm not saying that NVIDIA isn't a good long-term investment. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I am saying is that right now the growth rate appears to be slowing. As a result, there is likely to be less hype surrounding NVIDIA moving forward. And as such, market participants are now more likely to apply a tighter multiple to NVIDIA stock and consider putting capital to work in other areas of the market that have received less attention relative to the Mag 7. While this is not great for NVIDIA in the short term, this could be positive for the broader market as it could lead to more broadening and therefore a more fundamentally sound market rally in the future in which the market as a whole is moving higher rather than just mega cap tech moving higher. So that's what I'm thinking right now regarding NVIDIA. It will take some time for me to really digest these results and also for the rest of the market to digest these results. With that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.